She had been closing out the month-end books alone in an empty supper club, the kind of plain, easy-to-forget woman nobody ever bothered to look at twice. When the heavy brass doors bolted shut from the outside and the most feared man in Toronto walked in looking for $4 million that had gone missing, by the time he lowered himself into the booth across from her, calm as the frost creeping up the windows, Nora Whitfield finally understood the thing that turned her blood to slush. Her manager hadn't simply clocked out early and left her to lock up alone. He had left her sitting there on purpose. He had left her there as the bait. 2 hours earlier, she hadn't suspected a thing. The Halliford was the sort of place that made people lower their voices the moment they stepped inside, tucked into a converted bank building in Yorkville, all dark walnut paneling and green-shaded lamps, and a ceiling so high it swallowed sound. It had been feeding old Toronto money for the better part of 90 years. Premiers had eaten there. So had the kind of men whose names never appeared in the paper, but who decided quietly, who got contracts and who got buried. Nora kept the books for all of it, and she had learned a long time ago that the smartest thing a bookkeeper could do in a room like that was to be furniture, to take up no space, to see everything and notice nothing out loud. She was good at being furniture. 29 years old, soft and round in a way the world had spent her whole life politely suggesting she apologize for, Nora had perfected the art of folding herself smaller. She wore charcoal cardigans that didn't cling. She sat in the back office with the radiator that knocked. She ate her lunch standing at the prep counter, so she wouldn't have to ask anyone to budge over in a booth. And every single night, alone with the ledgers and the smell of seared bone marrow drifting in from the kitchen, she did the most honest work in that entire dishonest building. That Thursday in late November, the first real snow of the season, was coming down in fat, unhurried flakes outside the leaded glass, and Nora was the last person in the restaurant who wasn't supposed to be. Curtis Price had seen to that. Curtis was the general manager, a sleek man of 40 with a tan he topped up in February, and a habit of resting his hand on the small of waitresses' backs as he steered them through a thought. He had cornered her at 6 that evening, all warm teeth and aftershave, and told her the owners wanted the quarter reconciled before the auditors came Monday. And wasn't she a lifesaver? And could she just stay and push it through tonight? And oh, one more thing. Could she back the whole reservations and accounts system onto her personal drive before she left? Because the cloud sync had been acting up and he didn't trust it. He'd handed her the external hard drive himself, pressed it into her palm like a gift, closed her fingers around it. "You're the only one I trust with this, Nora," he'd said. "You know that, and God help her." The small, starved part of her that had spent 29 years waiting to be the only one anybody trusted had glowed at that. She'd nodded. She'd stayed. By 9, the dining room had emptied of its last lingering Scotch drinkers. By 10, the kitchen crew had scraped down the line and pulled on their coats. And by 10:40, the only living souls left under the Halliford's green lamps were Nora Whitfield, a half-eaten roll she'd swiped from a bread basket because she'd skipped supper, and the steady, patient column of numbers that refused to add up. That was the part that had been gnawing at her all night, if she was honest. The numbers. Because the numbers were wrong. Not wrong the way numbers were usually wrong. A transposed digit, a miskeyed GST line, a tip-out that didn't foot. Wrong in a careful way. Wrong in a way that took intelligence to build. There was a vendor on the books, Lakeshore Provisioning, that billed the Halliford 40, 50, sometimes $70,000 a month for produce and linen and consulting, and Nora had cut those checks herself for 2 years without blinking. But tonight, alone, with nothing to do but really look, she'd pulled the delivery logs. And Lakeshore Provisioning had never delivered so much as a head of romaine. The invoices were beautiful. The deliveries did not exist. Somebody had been moving an enormous amount of money through the restaurant and out the other side, dressed up as celery and tablecloths, and the person whose initials approved every one of those invoices, in tidy blue ink, was Curtis Price. She had just written the number on a sticky note, 4.2 million year to date, and was staring at it with the slow horror of a woman realizing she'd been cutting checks for a crime, when every light in the building seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't a sound, it was the absence of one. The HVAC, the hum of the wine fridges, the tick of the radiator, all of it dropped away at once, as if the building itself had been told to be quiet. Nora's head came up. Through the office doorway she could see across the dim dining room to the front of the house, where the great brass and glass doors stood, and as she watched, 2 men in dark wool overcoats stepped in from the snow, stamped their boots once on the mat, and did something she had never in 2 years seen anyone do. They threw the deadbolt from the inside, locking themselves in, locking her in. A third man came through behind them, and a fourth fanning out into the room with a loose, unhurried coordination that made the hair stand up on Nora's arms before her brain caught up to why. They didn't sit, they didn't speak, they simply occupied the space, hands hovering near the fronts of their coats, the way men stand when they are very calm because the violence is somebody else's to worry about. And then the last man came in, and Nora forgot briefly how to breathe. He was tall in a way that rearranged a room. Snow melted in his black hair and on the shoulders of a coat that probably cost more than she made in a year, and he moved through the empty restaurant like he already owned the deed to it, the building, and everyone foolish enough to be inside. His face was all hard, clean angles, a jaw you could have set a level against, and his eyes, even from across 30 feet of darkened dining room, were a pale, depthless grey that took in the whole space in one slow sweep and found it wanting. She knew him. Of course she knew him. Anyone in Toronto who could read knew him, and anyone who couldn't read knew enough to be afraid of him. Damien Castellan. The papers on the rare, brave days called him a reputed organized crime figure. Everyone else called him the King of the East End, or just the Don, and they said it the way you'd say the name of a weather system. He ran the families that ran the docks at the foot of the city, the construction unions, the cash that moved beneath the cash. 3 Crown attorneys had tried to put him away. None of them worked for the Crown anymore. One of them didn't work anywhere, on account of being at the bottom of Lake Ontario, or so the story went, and in Toronto the story always went. He was looking for someone. Nora could feel it in the way the 4 men spread to cover the exits, in the way the Don's grey gaze raked the empty booths. She told her legs to move, to slide off the office chair, to do anything but sit there glowing under the green lamp like the last fish in a drained tank. Her legs did not listen. Her hand closed uselessly around the sticky note that said 4.2 million, as if a post-it could be a shield. The Don's eyes found the lit office doorway, found her. For a long moment he simply considered her. The soft round woman frozen at the desk, the cardigan, the cheap drugstore reading glasses pushed up into her hair, the half-eaten roll. Then he crossed the dining room without a sound, his men staying back, and stopped in the office door. Up close he was even larger, and he smelled of cold air and cedar and something underneath it, faint and metallic, that her body recognized as danger before her mind named it. He didn't ask if he could sit. He pulled out the spare chair, the one where vendors usually waited to be paid, turned it with one hand, and lowered himself into it across the desk from her, with the unhurried ease of a man who had never once in his life worried about being told no. "You must be the accountant," he said. His voice was low and gravelled, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud because the entire world had already agreed to be quiet for it. Nora's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then, idiotically, I'm the bookkeeper." Something flickered behind the grey eyes. He reached out one large, scarred hand, and almost idly, touched the corner of the sticky note still trapped under her fingers, turned it so he could read it. 4.2 million. "Funny," Damien said softly. "That's nearly the exact figure I came here tonight to collect. Give or take what your Mr. Price has been skimming off the top for himself." He set the note down with terrible gentleness. "So, where is he?" The name landed between them like a stone through ice. Price, Curtis, and in the space of one heartbeat every piece Nora had been turning over all night clicked into a single sickening shape. "He's gone home," she heard herself say. "He left at 6. He told me to finish the books and back up the system and lock." She stopped. "Back up the system. Onto your personal drive. You're the only one I trust." The external hard drive sat on the desk beside her keyboard, small and black and innocent, its little blue light blinking. Damien watched her face change. He was a man who had spent 30 years reading the precise moment people understood they'd been used, and he watched it move across this soft, furious woman's face, like a front rolling in off the lake. "He told my associates," the Don went on, conversational now, almost kind, "that his partner would be here tonight, after hours, with everything, the full ledger, the offshore routing, the keys to $4 million of my money that he's been bleeding out through a fake produce company for 2 years. He gave us this address, this hour. He swore on his daughter that his partner would be sitting right here." A pause. "And here I am, and here you are, and no Curtis Price." He spread his hands, and the gesture took in the whole empty restaurant, the locked doors, the 4 armed men, the snow falling beyond the glass. "So you'll forgive me," he said, "if I find that interesting." And that was the moment the fear let go of Nora Whitfield. She'd been afraid her whole life. Afraid of taking up too much room. Afraid of being seen and afraid of being unseen. Afraid of the chair that might not hold her, and the booth she might not fit in, and the look in a stranger's eyes that said, "Should you really be eating that?" She'd spent 29 years making herself small and apologizing for the space that was left over, and she had spent tonight, cutting fraudulent checks for a man who patted her shoulder and called her the only one he trusted, while he set her up to sit alone in an empty room and take the fall for him in front of the most dangerous man in the country. The fear burned off all at once and left something white-hot underneath it. "That son of a bitch," she said. Damien's eyebrows rose just slightly. It was on his face the equivalent of another man falling out of his chair. That absolute, spineless, blow-dried son of a bitch. Nora was on her feet now, though she didn't remember standing, and the sticky note was crushed in her fist. He handed me that drive himself. He stood right there and closed my fingers around it, and told me I was the only one he trusted, and the whole time he knew. He knew you were coming. He set me up to be sitting here so you'd find me and not him. She jabbed a finger at the small blinking drive on the desk. He didn't email anybody. He didn't carry anything out. He couldn't. Could he, with your people watching him? So he put it on me. He put your stolen money on the fat girl in the back office, because who's ever going to look twice at her? She was shaking. There were 4 armed men 20 feet away, and the devil himself sitting at her vendor chair, and Nora Whitfield was too angry to remember that she was supposed to be afraid of dying. "Do you have any idea," she went on, her voice cracking, "the kind of week I've had? I covered 3 shifts I wasn't paid for. I ate a bread roll for supper. I stayed late because a man I trusted told me I mattered, and it turns out I mattered exactly as much as a USB stick he could leave in a drawer." She dragged the back of her wrist across her eyes, furious at the tears, furious that they'd come. "So no, I don't know where Curtis is. I do payroll and GST returns for a steakhouse. I am, apparently, the world's most disposable hiding place. If you're going to put me in the lake, Mr. Castellane, just get it over with. It'll honestly be less humiliating than the rest of my year." The silence after that was enormous. Behind the Don, the scarred lieutenant by the door, a heavy, watchful man Nora would later learn was called Gideon, shifted his weight. "Boss," he said quietly. "She's a civilian. Price played her. There's nothing here. We should pull the cameras and go hunt him." Damien Castellane did not look at Gideon. He had not, in fact, taken his eyes off Nora once, because in 30 years he had watched a great many people understand they were about to die. They wept, they bargained, they wet themselves and called him Sir. He had a whole gallery of those faces, and not one of them had ever interested him. What he had never once seen, not in a courtroom, not in a back room, not at the end of a pier, was a woman discover she'd been used as a shield by the mob and respond by being insulted on principle. Not afraid of his guns, offended at her manager's manners, he looked at the high color in her round cheeks, the defiant set of a soft jaw. The way she stood there filling the doorway, unapologetic, the first genuinely unapologetic thing he'd seen in years. The whole world had spent her life trying to convince this woman she was furniture, and the world, the Don decided, was a great deal stupider than it gave itself credit for. "Gideon," he said, eyes still on her. "Take the men. Lock down the bridges and the island airport. Price has, what, a 4-hour start, and the girl," Nora held her breath. "The girl," Damien said, rising, "comes with me." "What?" She backed into the desk. No, you just heard him. I'm nothing. I told you everything. You can't go home, Kara." He came around the desk, unhurried, and when his hand closed around her wrist, his touch was startlingly warm against her cold skin, and gentle and absolutely immovable.
"Price didn't just hide my money on your drive.
He hid you on it. The moment he made you his alibi, he tied your name to $4 million. And there are men in this city. The Gallaghers, for one, who would peel you apart to get at it. The second they learn what Curtis did, you become the most valuable woman in Toronto, and not in a way you'll enjoy." His thumb moved once over the racing pulse in her wrist. "You walk out that door alone, you don't see Monday. You walk out with me, and I promise you this. No one will ever overlook you again." Nora stared up at him, her chest heaving, snow ticking against the windows, the whole insane night pressing down on her. "Why?" she breathed. "I'm collateral. I'm a hiding place with a heartbeat. Why would you?" His free hand came up and, with a tenderness that frightened her more than any of it, brushed a tear from the corner of her eye with his thumb. His grey gaze had gone dark, and something in it had turned proprietary and starving all at once. "Because he chose you to be invisible," Damien said. and I've never in my life seen anyone take up a room the way you just did." He raised his other hand, snapped his fingers once, and across the restaurant the deadbolts slid back. Cold air poured in off the street. "You're coming with me," he told her, and it was not a request, and there was no longer any room in the world to argue with it. The drive south was a blur of snow and red taillights smeared across bulletproof glass. Nora sat rigid in a seat softer than her own bed while the city she'd lived in her whole life slid past unrecognizably, the bright canyon of Bay Street, then down, away from the towers, toward the cold black edge of the lake. They went into a private garage beneath a building she'd walked past 100 times without knowing what it was. Past men with rifles slung casual as messenger bags, and up in a mirrored elevator that smelled of cedar, into a penthouse that looked like it had been built for a man who answered to no one. Floor-to-ceiling glass held the whole frozen sweep of Lake Ontario. The snow had stopped and the lights of the harbor lay scattered out there like spilled coins. "Sit," Damien said, not unkindly, nodding at a sofa the color of charcoal. She sat. She wrapped her arms around herself. The cardigan that had felt safe and shapeless in the office now felt like nothing at all, and she was suddenly and acutely aware that she was a plus-size bookkeeper in drugstore glasses, sitting in a crime lord's living room above the lake. He poured 2 glasses of something amber and brought her one. When his knuckles brushed hers, a small live current went up her arm, and she hated her body for noticing. "You're shivering," he observed, settling into the chair across from her, his eyes mapping her face, then dropping, once, slow, with an interest he didn't bother to hide, to the full curve of her where she sat. "Are you afraid of me, Nora? You locked me in a restaurant with armed men and drove me to a fortress over the lake." She took too large a sip and the liquor scorched all the way down. "Yes, obviously." A low laugh rolled out of him, surprisingly warm. "Good, fear keeps people alive, but you won't need it here. No one under this roof will so much as look at you wrong, or they'll answer to me. You have my word, and my word is the only currency I've never once devalued." She didn't get to reply, because the elevator opened and Gideon strode in, scarred face grim, a tablet in his hand. "Boss, we lost him. He's not at Pearson, not Billy Bishop, not Union, not the bus terminal. We tore his condo apart. His drives are wiped, military-grade magnet, and the lobby cameras have him leaving empty-handed at 5:15. Gideon's jaw worked. "And the Gallaghers are moving men into the junction tonight. We think Price sold them the routing keys for protection. If Liam Gallagher gets those offshore numbers, he drains every account you've got by morning." Damien went very still, a muscle ticking in his cheek. "He left empty-handed," he repeated slowly. "No drive, no phone." "So where," he said, rising, beginning to pace the length of a rug that had probably been knotted by hand a century ago, "are the keys to my kingdom?" And Nora, watching him, felt her night rearrange itself one final time. "Wait," she said. Both men turned. She set her glass down on the glass table with a sharp little click and reached for the black hard drive she'd carried out of the Halliford, clutched against her chest like a hot water bottle, without ever once thinking about what it was. "He didn't take it because he didn't have to take it," she said, and her voice had gone flat and clear, the voice she used when a column finally footed. "He made me take it. He told me the cloud sync was down. He told me to back up the entire system to this drive and keep it with me." She turned it over in her hands. "Everything. Reservations, payroll, the books. And the books are where I found Lakeshore Provisioning. The fake vendor, the 4.2 million. She looked up. "It's all on here. He didn't hide your money in a numbered account in the Caymans, Mr. Castellane. He hid it inside a steakhouse's accounting backup and walked it out the door on a frightened bookkeeper, because nobody was ever going to search the fat girl carrying the spreadsheets." Gideon swore in 2 languages. Damien Castellane crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't snatch the drive from her. Instead, he braced both hands on the back of the sofa, one on either side of her, and leaned down until his face was a breath from hers, and when he spoke his voice was thick with something that was equal parts murder and awe. "He didn't use you as bait, Nora," he said. "He used you as the vault. He knew my people were watching every bite that left his hands, so he poured my entire empire into a payroll backup and handed it to the one person on Earth the whole world had trained itself not to see." His grey eyes burned. "You walked his treasure straight through my front door, and you did it without knowing, and you'd have done it without ever being thanked. You are," he breathed, "extraordinary." It took his people 19 minutes to pull the ledger off the drive, peel the fake vendor away from the real money, and lock $4.2 million back behind the Don's own firewalls. By midnight, Damien Castellane had his kingdom back. But Nora wasn't finished. At 2 in the morning, her own phone, sitting on the glass table where the screen lit the dark, began to buzz. Number withheld. She knew exactly who it was. She looked at Damien, who watched her, and gave one slow nod. She put it on speaker. Nora. Oh, thank God. Curtis Price's voice came through, breathless and oily and afraid. Are you okay? Where are you? She dug her fingernails into her palm and reached for every ounce of the humiliation she'd swallowed across 2 years of his hand on the small of her back. I'm home, Curtis. The police came to the restaurant. They cleared everyone out. What is going on? Listen to me, baby, listen. The endearment landed like a slap. I'm in trouble. Bad people are after me. That drive, the backup I had you make, I need it. I need you to bring it to me tonight. Right now. If I don't get it to them, they kill me. Do you understand? Why didn't you just keep it yourself? She asked, soft as anything. A pause. Then the charm sloughed off his voice all at once, the way it always had when he thought no one important was listening. Because I couldn't, you stupid. He caught himself. Just bring it. Cherry Street, the old dock shed, slip 9. Don't call anyone. And Nora, quit blubbering and move. You really think a man like me wanted you for anything else? You were a hard drive with a pulse, a walking filing cabinet nobody would ever frisk. Now bring me my money before I come find you and make you sorry I ever learned your name. The penthouse had gone arctic. Damien did not shout. He did not break a single object in that priceless room. He reached down, ended the call with one finger, and the look in his grey eyes promised a quiet, total kind of violence that made Nora's breath catch in her throat. Gideon, he said, bring the cars. The dock sheds at the foot of Cherry Street smelled of diesel and rot and cold lake water, fog peeling off the harbour and curling between the rusted cargo containers. Nora stepped out of the lead car, still in her charcoal cardigan, but Damien had draped his own black overcoat across her shoulders against the wind, and it hung heavy and warm and smelled of him, and somehow that single piece of wool made her feel armoured in a way nothing ever had. Walk toward slip 9, he murmured, one hand pressed flat and steady against the small of her back. The same place Curtis used to touch, and how strange, how the exact same gesture could mean two opposite things. I'm 3 steps behind you. He will not lay a hand on you. Not while there's breath in my body. She nodded. Her heels clicked across the wet concrete and into the fog, and her heart, she realized, was perfectly steady. She wasn't the woman who hid in the back office anymore. She wasn't furniture. She walked. Curtis stepped out from behind a container, and the sight of him almost made her laugh. The tan looked grey under the dock lights. His expensive coat was soaked and rumpled, his blow-dried hair plastered flat, and his hand shook around a cheap black pistol he clearly had no idea how to hold. Drive. On the ground. Now. His voice cracked. Don't make this hard, Nora. She stopped 10 feet away and did not reach into her purse. She simply looked at him, really looked, the way she'd never let herself look at anyone who'd made her feel small. You're a coward, Curtis, she said. Shut up. The gun jerked up toward her chest. Put it down, you stupid C. The Gallaghers aren't coming. The voice rolled out of the fog behind her, low and final, and Curtis Price's face emptied of every drop of blood. Damien Castellane stepped into the cone of halogen light like the last thing a man ever sees, and behind him Gideon and a dozen armed men fanned out across the wet concrete, every weapon trained on the shaking figure by the water. The pistol clattered out of Curtis's hand. His knees buckled and he went down onto the soaked dock, babbling. Mr. Castellane, boss, please I can explain. It was the Gallaghers, they forced me, I'd never. Damien didn't look at him. He walked up beside Nora and laid his hand on the curve of her waist, drew her against his side, and let Curtis watch exactly where the power in this story had always, secretly been. You stole from me, Price, the Don said, and his voice carried over the slap of black water against the pilings. I could forgive a thief. I've been a thief, but you took a good woman who balanced your books and trusted your word, and you offered her up to be buried in my place. His arm tightened around her. You insulted what's mine. Curtis gaped at the hand on Nora's waist. Yours? Damien looked down at her, ignoring the weeping man entirely, his grey eyes gone almost gentle. He's yours to answer for, Kara, he said quietly. You're the one he framed. You're the one he called a filing cabinet with a pulse. His thumb traced once along her jaw. Does he go home, or does he go in the lake? Your call, it has always been your call. He just never thought to ask you. Nora looked at Curtis Price, kneeling in the freezing slush. The man who'd closed her fingers around a drive and called her the only one he trusted, who'd patted her shoulder and stolen her dignity in small daily increments for 2 years, who'd been willing to feed her to the wolves rather than face them himself. She felt the warm, solid weight of Damien's arm around her, and for the first time in her entire life she was not the smallest thing in the room. "Take out the trash," she said. Damien smiled. It was a slow, beautiful, terrible thing, and he bent and pressed his lips to the top of her snow-damp hair the way a man kisses something holy. "Gideon," he said, without ever taking his eyes off her. "The lake." Curtis's screams unspooled into the fog and were swallowed by it, dragged away into the dark. And then there was only the wind off the water and the two of them on the empty pier. Damien turned her fully toward him, his hands sliding up to frame her round, cold-flushed face, and the wind whipped her hair across both their mouths, and she had never in her life felt so warm. "He was wrong about you," he said low. "He thought he'd found something disposable, something to hide behind, a woman the world had agreed not to look at." His thumbs moved over her cheekbones, and his grey eyes dropped to her lips and stayed there, burning. He had it exactly backwards. "You're not the thing people hide behind, Nora Whitfield. You're the thing the rest of us spend our whole lives trying to deserve to stand next to. You are not furniture. You are not collateral. You're a queen who was raised to believe she was a footstool, and I intend to spend the rest of my life correcting the record." He kissed her then, on the cold dock above the Black Lake, and it tasted of cedar and danger, and a devotion so absolute it frightened her, almost as much as the gun had. And Nora, who had eaten her lunch standing up so she wouldn't have to ask anyone to move over, who had folded herself smaller every day of her life, who had spent that very evening believing she mattered exactly as much as a USB stick in a drawer, gripped the lapels of a crime lord's coat and kissed him back and stepped at last out of the shadows she'd been hiding in and into the only place she had ever truly fit. So here's the question worth sitting with as the snow comes down over the harbour. Did Nora make the right call, walking willingly into Damien Castellane's dark and dangerous world? Or did she simply trade one kind of cage for another, gilded one? And if it were you sitting in that back office at midnight, overlooked your whole life and suddenly seen for the first time by the most feared man in the city, would you have the nerve to take out the trash? Tell us down in the comments. And if a story about a woman the world refused to see finally taking up every inch of the room she was owed is the kind of story you came here for, stay a while. The Dark Throne has plenty more where this came from.